Hello, FACEIT fans. It was a jam-packed week of action in North America, so we've got a lot of games to get through. While EMEA moved a lot of their games pre-Dallas, a lot of the North American teams left a backlog post-Dallas, and there's quite a lot of movement still to happen in this table as we look at this final week. While everything has been fairly set in terms of the teams that have qualified for top 8, a lot of the usual candidates, there's still a lot of movement in terms of seeding, and there is, of course, that crucial battle for those last couple of spots in the top 8. It was really a battle between Citrus Nation, Pirates in Pyjamas, Green Fortnite, and Fluffy Aimers, all fighting it out for 8th place. Pirates in Pyjamas did start the week in 8th place, but still with 3 or 4 games to play for most of these teams, a lot can happen. So let me walk you through all of it, because there is a lot. And we actually start with one of those crucial games between 2 of the hopefuls, Citrus Nation and Green Fortnite. Now, Citrus Nation are a team that did very well in OWTS Stage 2, but as we always talk about in these videos, they've had roster problems, but not today. Not today. Lethal's back, Zeb's back, Tap's here, the whole squad is here, but it was a sweep for Green Fortnite. The blowout on Samoa was really, really one-sided. Anian, Halo, Desatine, all on 0 deaths. More competitive once we got to Midtown, but Green Fortnite with this crucial win. Especially got to highlight Bubblegum here, who put in massive numbers on both maps and really helped their team to a huge win to kick off the week. Then we got a top of the table clash between M80 and Luminosity, and M80 are in the midst of a very big rebuild. So while we still see the same backline at the moment with Ultraviolet and Liar, Nero, their emergency sub, has come in, as well as Tree and Kaluge. Now, Tree and Kaluge are very much expected to remain part of this roster going forward and part of their new look. But Nero really just here as emergency substitute, and there's still an expectation that Liar might change out for Bliss later down the line. But it didn't seem to slow M80 down here despite the newness of the roster and having to come together last minute like this. On Oasis, we kick off with a bit of amalgam mirror, and actually Luminosity do look like the better team, but once M80 get Kaluge onto Sigma, he does so much. He makes Dante's life hell, and they're able to take that Oasis. But as we get on to Midtown and Junkertown, it really becomes a double flex support mirror. Luke Mino plays all the maps for Luminosity. Squid moves on to the Kiri to help support King on the flank. And actually, Luminosity look really good. The Midtown first attack by Luminosity is so good on Midtown. I think it really is their best point of the game. Midtown, maybe even their best map. And they are able to win that one fairly convincingly. Once we got onto Junkertown, it's the same type of mirror. Again, it's very close, it's very competitive. Ultimately, both teams struggled on that second part of Junkertown, and it took a bit of an emergency swap to die for M80 to clutch out the defense. So they do come out on top, and really was actually a start of a very good week from M80, given all their roster changes and everything that was going on. Then we get NRG Shock versus Shikigami, and it's got to be one of the biggest upsets of the week. Shikigami take it 2-0. It was close, it was competitive, and Shikigami have really been in good form lately, and they prove it again here. It's worth saying Shock were without Scissors, who has really been their star player in their Rise and their Dallas campaign. But Wimone feels like he should be a pretty suitable replacement, a talented player, but not enough here. I think the biggest gap when we look at the numbers really had to be Solo over Infected. Felt like there was a large tank gap on this in this case, and again, the introduction of Doomed has really revitalized and powered up this Shikigami roster, and what a great win for them as they go into the top 8 campaign next week. Then we get another NRG Shock game, this time against Pip, and it was a tight affair. Once again, NRG struggle on control and have to have a comeback victory. I mean, it's not bad that you can keep having comeback victories, but eventually you probably want to win a cough at some point. It was really a monster performance from Strider when we look at the numbers here on Busan. But as we moved into the later maps, it's worth saying Scissors was back for this one and put in a pretty big performance alongside PG and Rack, especially on that Shimbali, to help seal the comeback victory. So as much as Shock would qualify for the top 8 no matter what, this was probably a much tighter affair than they wanted, and especially with how desperate Pip were for any win they could get, probably a real opportunity in this one that they missed out on. Luminosity versus TSM next, and it was another free mapper and another struggle on control for Luminosity. They lose out on that one, but they do win the Icon World, and once again a Junkertown decide, and that goes against them. This is probably one of the games we'll check out on stream and watch the replays of later in the week, because it was a very tight affair, and I think these two teams are very much in the chasing pack behind Toronto, so it's very interesting to see where they are right now, what their current power levels are. UNC Inc versus Avidity next, and it was a bit of a bottom of a table clash, and UNC Inc take it pretty convincingly. Painkiller putting up the biggest numbers. UNC Inc were very much out of the race for top 8, but obviously do want to avoid that relegation from the Masters division, and this win very much sorted that out for them. Luminosity Free mapper. Who would have guessed it, huh? This time against Shikigami. Luminosity struggle on the control again, but they have a comeback victory. An absolute dogfight on Shambali to finish it. So this is another one we'll take a look at the replays of later in the week on the Twitch stream. But a really close series, and Luminosity finally put a bit of a dent in Shikigami's good run, but both teams pretty set to get in that top 8 spot. Fluffy Aimers were one of the teams we talked about in this race for top 8, and they played UNC Inc, which should in theory have just been a slam dunk game, get the win on the board, put themselves in contention for that top 8 spot, but they fumble here, and this is an absolutely devastating loss for Fluffy Aimers' campaign. Really wouldn't expect them to lose to UNC Inc here, and while both maps were super competitive, they fall right at the end, and they had more games to play, but ultimately this is where I think Fluffy Aimers really let themselves down. And of course, UNC Inc have to be happy with the win, and they really do now 100% seal their avoidance of relegation positions. Citrus Nation also played FMCL this week, and it's not a good time to play FMCL because they've been in great form as of late, and that did not let up here. Citrus Nation would have liked to get a win, especially with their full-strength roster back and how close that race for top 8 was, but FMCL were giving out no freebies. Seeker and Admiral were particularly big numbers on Iconworld as well to help see them through that tighter map there, but FMCL really do seem like the informed team, maybe alongside Toronto as we go into these playoffs. Who haven't Luminosity played this week? They're going to play Green Fortnite as well, and this time Luminosity do win the control and they dominate on Midtown. A very one-sided affair, and maybe that's what you would have expected on paper, but especially with Green Fortnite's situation, really they would have hoped they could maybe steal something here, or even map difference could come into it. So a pretty one-sided affair, honestly. Worth noting as well, Luke and Squid actually both played map 1 for Luminosity here, so a potential new look on Oasis to try and turn around their fortunes on that one. FMCL up again. They played another one of the top 8 hopefuls, and FMCL were giving no favours to anybody. Fluffy Aimers needed a massive upset, especially after their disappointing result earlier in the week, but it was not close this time here. FMCL keep up their good form, and Fluffy Aimers can't do anything to redeem their previous mistakes here. Pip came into this one against M80 needing a big upset again with how tight it was. Any win could be massive, but M80's new look roster not giving anything away either. Kaluge put up pretty big numbers in both maps, a 22-0 on Oasis, and they kind of just sweep the floor with Pip here and leave them desperate for more wins. That desperation for wins didn't really let up when they faced Toronto, and Toronto were in no mood to give any favours. After a disappointing Dallas campaign, there was maybe a few question marks. How will Toronto respond? How will they deal with that? But honestly, it was a one-sided affair here. Worth noting is Toronto did decide to avoid the Malga mirror. They played Sigma into it. They played Dive onto it on Busan Downtown. So they do seem to want to pull away from the Malga mirror. Whether that's going to be a long-term decision or just a decision they've made short-term since they've not scrimmed as much since coming back from Dallas. But it works out perfectly fine from here, and they get a pretty clean 2-0 over Pip. Green Fortnite then took on the Shock, again hoping for an upset victory to try and swing that race for top 8 into their favour, but Shock with Scissors back, they look dominant again. They've struggled on control historically, Shock, but PG put in a massive performance here on Samoa to help them over the line there. Then a more tightly run Midtown, but again Shock come out on top, and Green Fortnite left without a win here as well. Then TSM took on Toronto in Toronto's final game of this round robin, and Toronto did not let up. Another 2-0 sweep. Again, it felt like Toronto were avoiding the Malga mirror very much, but the Sigma comp, it worked out for them really well. A little bit of Doom even on Oasis worked out fine. TSM didn't play all that much Malga into them either, but Toronto were quite happy to counter comp. Even a rare Rhine attack on Midtown to seal the victory here. So a perfect 15-0 for Toronto, only dropping a single map, not one map to FMCL the other week. So a really confident campaign from Toronto, and they very much do go into the top 8 as the dramatic favourites. M80 had another game, this time against Green Fortnite. Green Fortnite, again, still hoping for an upset victory somewhere along the line. And this game was actually very competitive, very close, but Green Fortnite couldn't even steal a map in the end. I think, again, when we look at who has put up the biggest numbers, who was the most impressive, we're looking at Tree, we're looking at Kaluge again. And with Tree and Kaluge very much expected to be starting players in this M80 roster going forward, it's actually quite a promising sign, all the success and the individual level of performance they've had, considering they've had very little time together as a roster overall. Then Fluffy Gamers took on Avidity, and this was their easiest game of the week, one they would expect to be a slam dunk, and it was straightforward for Fluffy Gamers in the end, but unfortunately for them, the damage to their top 8 campaign had really happened earlier in the week, so they'll be glad to get this win, but it really was a little bit of a case of too little too late in this one. Then we got Gilberts' Nightmare against Pirates in Pyjamas. Now, this should have been the easiest game for Pirates in Pyjamas this week, not having to play any of the top dogs, but it was an absolute dogfight. Pirates in Pyjamas do tend to follow this theme of often playing to the level of their opponents, having sometimes close games against top teams, but then having really close games against weaker teams as well. They do come out after a 3-4 overtime Shambali victory here, Pirates in Pyjamas, so they do get over the line, but a mighty scare, and it's worth noting for Gilbert's Nightmare as well. Now, Jake actually wasn't available for this game, so Mumu was filling on DPS, so I think if we look at all the facts that are presented to us here, it's quite clear that Jake might indeed have been the problem for Gilbert's Nightmare this season. Now, this game is probably the most important game of the week in terms of the race for top 8. Both teams heavily competing for it, and because of the nature of the tiebreakers in FACEIT, if you're level with another team, the tiebreaker is, of course, head-to-head. So winning this game not only gives you the map win and denies it from your opponent, it also means if you end up in a tie, you get that head-to-head victory, which will prove to be crucial once we get to the standings at the end of the week here. And Citrus Nation, they didn't actually have their full roster available. Once again, availability caused some problems, and Zomba has to come in. But Zomba puts in a massive performance here. Really helps their team to a pretty dominant victory in the end. And what a huge win for Citrus Nation. That really has been a crucial one in what has been quite a rocky campaign so far. Luminosity against Shock, and it's a free mapper, of course it is. It's a Luminosity game in the final week, and both teams had struggled on control coming into the week, but NRG come out on top this time. A 17-1 from Cow in this opening map really helped them to that. But then we get to Midtown, and while it was close, Luminosity are very good at Midtown. Prove it again here, getting the victory, forcing it to that map 3. But Shock have always looked good on map 3, and they look good again here on Shambali. PGE putting in a lot of the work there and helping Shock to a nice victory. Now, will help boost them up a little bit in the rankings and seedings as we go into playoffs. Shikigami have been a team in great form, really making a great final push and securing their spot in top 8. They played bottom of table smart fellas here in a game that probably ultimately wouldn't matter that much, but they got dragged into an absolute dogfight. But Shikigami still come out on top. They clutch it out when they need to in that Route 66, but probably a little bit scarier than Shikigami were hoping for. Then we get Green Fortnite with one of their easier games of the week, on paper at least, against Gilbert's Nightmare, but it was anything but easy. They actually lost this game, and this, much like Fluffy Aimer's mistake and fumble earlier in the week, this was an absolutely devastating result for Green Fortnite. This should have been a slam dunk for them. This should have put them at least in contention and in some kind of tiebreaker for that top 8 spot, but they actually lose to Gilbert's Nightmare, so a huge missed opportunity for Green Fortnite. My lawyer has informed me, I should point out, Jake was actually in for this game, so maybe it turns out Jake wasn't the problem, and I'd like to rescind my previous Jake criticism. Then M80 had to take on Valentine, and this was their easiest game both on paper and in practice. It was the new look roster, of course, from M80 again, and this win really helped seal their spot as that second seed and get themselves into that crucial side of a bracket that doesn't have Toronto in it once we go into playoffs. With the race for top 8 being so tight, Citrus Nation would have loved a victory against TSM here, and they were so close actually. They take the first map, the Hollywood was close, but as we got to Route 66, it became very one-sided. TSM, obviously, especially versus a team like Citrus Nation, have way more comps in their back pocket, way more options to shift the matchup if things aren't going their way, and that's a little bit of what we saw on Route 66. Big performances from CJ and Rocket, huge numbers from them in that final map, really helped TSM to victory here, and while it doesn't really affect TSM's ability to qualify or not qualify, they already sealed for top 8, does help bump them up those seedings as much as they can. Then we have Gilbert's Nightmare against Valentine, and what should have been one of their easier games of the week, but actually not easy at all for Valentine. Valentine get a convincing 2-0 and help separate themselves above Gilbert's Nightmare here. And Jake actually played in this game as well, so I'd like to rescind my previous resignation and go back to blaming Jake. Jake was in for this one, so Jake is indeed the problem, as we can finally see from this piece of evidence in front of us. We then got a bottom of the table clash between Smartfellas and Avidity, and Smartfellas get their first win of the season right at the end. It was close on the pool, it was even closer on Icon World, but nice for Smartfellas to get this win, even if it doesn't ultimately move them out of the relegation positions. Still nice not to go winless in this first season of the FACEIT Masters. Citrus Nation had a lot of tough games this week, and in theory this UNC Inc game should have been the easiest of the lot, but obviously given how close all of top 8 was, it was a must win for them. They couldn't afford any slip-ups. They were at full strength, and it did actually end up being a relatively straightforward victory, so this was one that sealed it for Citrus Nation, pulled them level in terms of match wins with Pip, and obviously they had that head-to-head advantage as well. Then we got a bottom of the table clash here where Smartfellas were coming off the high of their first win against Avidity, but it wasn't enough to see them over the line over UNC Inc, who make themselves kind of towards the top of that bottom of the table hierarchy. Then we saw Avidity take on FMCL, and FMCL have been in great form, as we've said, but this was actually super close, way closer than I think anyone would have had it be on paper, but FMCL still come out on top, and while it's maybe not completely reflected in their position in the top 8 standings, I still think FMCL are the most informed team in North America right now. Despite their previous missed opportunities, Fluffy Aimers could still force a tiebreaker situation if they were able to upset TSM here. Unfortunately, TSM, one of the better teams in North America right now, so they weren't able to do it. They take down Fluffy Aimers in 2 maps. That seals Fluffy Aimers' fate outside the top 8, and obviously helps TSM up a little bit in the seedings as well. So a chance for Fluffy Aimers at the end here, but certainly one of the harder chances for them to take compared to some of their games earlier on. Which, of course, brings us to the standings. Now, there'll be some things that aren't too surprising. Toronto Defiant at the top. As we talked about earlier, 15-0, 30-1. Can't really argue with that. M80, 14-1. Obviously, that one loss coming to Toronto. Very much a clear second seed. Then it gets a little bit tighter in the chasing pack. Shock and TSM tied up, but NRG ahead on tiebreaker for head-to-head. And similarly with Luminosity and FMCL tied up, but Luminosity ahead on that tiebreaker situation. Then we have Shikigami taking 7th spot thanks to their good run in these last couple of weeks, and then Citrus Nation just about eke it out. Pirates in Pyjamas not able to win that crucial match against Citrus Nation. If they had, it would have put them into that 8th spot instead, but Citrus Nation clutch up, and especially when we look at the other teams chasing, if Green Fortnite or Fluffy Aimers had won one of those games where maybe expected to win, instead of fumbling it in the final week, they would have forced that tiebreaker situation, and we maybe could have seen something different. Maybe especially for Green Fortnite, who would have had map difference advantage over Pirates in Pyjamas in this situation as well. But doesn't work out for these teams. But it does go to show, even though North America might have a pretty big gap between Toronto and the rest of the teams, now once we go past the Toronto category, especially since M80 have made so many changes, all these teams in this sort of 2nd to 6th spot are really going to be in a heated battle for these top 3 esports World Cup spots in playoffs. And even Shikigami and Citrus Nation, they're not incapable of an upset either. So it's going to be super competitive, maybe outside of the Toronto category in North America. So we should take a look at that playoff bracket now. Since there's no tiebreakers left to be decided, we get the full bracket. We can see our opening fixtures here in the upper bracket quarterfinals. Toronto on the side with TSM and Luminosity. Citrus Nation, as they only scraped in an 8th, do have that Toronto opening fixture, which will not be easy. Meanwhile, M80, NRG, and FMCL are probably pretty happy to see themselves on the other side. I think it's very difficult fixtures for TSM, Luminosity, Shock, and FMCL, all having to play against pretty close rivals in this opening fixture. Remember, it is only top 3 in North America that get that Esports World Cup spot, so a lot to play for in North America. These games will be very exciting. It all kicks off on the 14th of June, so this Friday. So stay tuned for that. We'll be covering a lot of the games on Twitch, as well as catching out any of the replays and maybe doing some analysis content as well. Breaking down how the series went, what's going right for teams, what's going wrong for teams. I think while Toronto are the out-and-out favourites, I really think FMCL are in very good form. NRG obviously still have the sort of Dallas buff. They've had that experience playing against a lot of the Koreans. We'll see if that helps them at all. Maybe, maybe not. But that's all to happen later in the week. So hopefully that caught you up on what was quite a lot of North America games. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.